What's happening, furries and creeps? My name is Koty-Tang. I hope you're all having a lovely day, and maybe I can make it a bad one. Let's talk about next-gen gaming for a moment. I think a good place to start is pricing. Making next-gen games $70 is actually pretty fine, and here's why. Up until a few years ago, big games were coming out left and right, which made that $60 price tag vicious to any wallet not prepared to be manhandled weekly. And nowadays, every game is delayed for 7 years at a time, outright cancelled, or just in development hell. It's uncertain when the next worthwhile game will even come out at this point. So the way I see it, paying $70 every year and a half for one game isn't too bad of a deal when you think about it. But what about when that game only offers about 6 to 14 hours of gameplay? That doesn't really sound like a valid playtime to be charging $60 for, much less $70 now. I applaud developers who know their game is short as hell and drop the price down to $15 to $40. You would think that when making an exclusive AAA game, the developers would make sure every dollar spent on the game is worthwhile. If Ratchet and Clank followed that philosophy, I wouldn't have to talk about it. Now, it's not that Rift Apart is a bad game, because it's not. It's also not a very good game. If games are going to be $70 now, then this indie length has got to come to an end. And that's the best way to describe this AAA title's length. Indie. Unjustifiably short for a AAA experience. I love 3D platformers, but this game, this was bullshit. But it also wasn't. Ratchet and Clank games have never been known for their length, and Rift Apart does have a few new ideas that work well. I'm fully aware this game is being reviewed to such a high regard, and it seems to be the perfect PS5 game to an overwhelming amount of people. Using just a few words isn't going to explain how this game falls so short, yet sets the bar so high. I think we'll start simple. Let's talk about how Insomniac decided to present the story, and what it means for the lengths of each world. Writing a story for your game can be a challenge, as gameplay and regular enemies have to be constantly involved in the story. But Rift Apart seems to have been created backwards. The game plays as though the story was made first, and then they had to make a game around it. Starting a few years after Into the Nexus, Ratchet has retired as a hero, and we tune in during a celebration in his honor. It all goes wrong because of Clank's present to Ratchet, which is a Dimensionator, which will allow Ratchet to freely move through dimensions and potentially find his lost race of Lombaxes. But Ratchet had actually decided that he no longer wants to search for the Lombaxes, and unsurprisingly, everything goes wrong immediately, which jumpstarts the events of Rift Apart. Throughout the game, you'll be switching between Ratchet and Rivet until the two eventually meet and finish it off with the fight against the big bad. Okay, so the story has a solid beginning, middle, and end. If it were a feature-length film, that is. Honestly, you could just watch the 1.5 hour runtime from cutscenes and you'd have essentially played the game yourself. Don't get me wrong, the story was good. However, unless your fan base is broken, the main selling point of a game is the gameplay. A simple story can be overcome by some dope gameplay, but here's what's funny. The gameplay of Rift Apart doesn't even hold a candle to its previous iterations, but when it comes to presentation, it's highly cinematic, engaging, and unique. It's also only 6 to 8 hours long. And I'm not just exaggerating that number. You could look up playthroughs right now and find hundreds of them just like that. So here's the problem. The story seems to have been made well before the first level was even added in. Maybe that doesn't sound so bad. Well, think of it this way. When you make the story like most games do, where it's gameplay focused, the story will have to adapt to the constant changes in development over time, and mini edits can be freely added in along the way that extends the story. Mini games often enhance the experience by adding smaller stories inside of their main story that devolve into branching narratives that deviate from the main plot until it intersects and you're back on track. However, when you add gameplay into an already fully crafted story, you're gonna be met with a variety of issues. Most times you'll basically end up sprinkling in gameplay for the gaps where there would just be screen cuts. The story can only be adjusted to give the player control of whatever event in the story they were placed in. Rift Apart often places you in control of those exciting, iconic moments in the story. And that's one of the things that makes this game so deceptively fun. It's just proven at this point. Playing cinematic moments will never get old in games. With such limitations to story, the world suffered because of this. There's a total of 10 levels in this game, and sure, maybe that sounds like a pretty okay amount. So let me break them all down for you. But the funny thing is that this actually won't take long. Oh, and here's your spoiler warning, but I'll let you skip ahead if you don't want to hear any. Megalopolis is the first time the player gains control of a character, which is roughly 3 minutes into the game. You walk out onto an ongoing celebration in Ratchet and Clank's honor. This acts as the tutorial as Ratchet runs through mock-up areas of his previous adventures. It eventually ends up being attacked by Dr. Nefarious and his goons, which leads into Corson 5. This level lasts about 20 to 25 minutes. Now, when I give these times, I'm including cutscenes, so really if I went about skipping cutscene times, the levels would really be cut in half, and this level would come to about 10 to 13 minutes. Here's where you get the first instance of the game's seamless loading they advertise so much. Every time this happens, it's entirely scripted, so you will never actually just jump from world to world manually. You're still gonna need a spaceship. And speaking of spaceships, welcome to Nefarious City. This level is the first time you get a full view of Rivet, but you'll continue to play as Ratchet as he searches for Clank. After chasing a character through a nightclub and the top of a building, you'll find a dimension jumping boss and the level comes to a close. A side activity can be completed here where you break into a factory and steal a spy bot. The first time you actually get to play as Rivet is in Sargasso, and here you realize that she has the same exact weapons, animations, and gadgets as Ratchet. The only real difference is that she's cute and has a vagina. You save a race of Morts, all named Mort, and then Rivet reads Clank's mind and is now deciding to team up with Ratchet. A side quest can be completed here where you fly around and get fruit for a flying pet. Xerkes is the shortest world out of all of them. Rivet and Clank arrive at Xerkes, which is a bar with an arena connected to it. Rivet needs a signal booster so that she can contact Ratchet. A pirate is the one that has the piece that she needs, and Rivet enters the arena to battle with his crew. She wins, and she leaves the planet with the signal booster. That's it. Now, you can participate in more arena fights after, but you'll only be able to do the Bronze Cup the first time you get there. On planet Savali, Ratchet meets a character named Gary who will help him find what he needs to build a new Dimensionator. On the way, he meets this dimension's Clank, who is later named Kit. They save the archives from nefarious troops and find the Dimensionator's blueprints. A side quest to find out the relation between Lombaxes and this planet is able to be completed here. And now we're already halfway through the game, and on our way to Blizzard Prime. Rivet and Clank arrive on the search for phase quartz. They solve the mystery of why the mining planet was destroyed, and after getting their phase quartz, it's immediately destroyed. But there is somebody that just might be able to fix it. A side quest can be completed here where you defeat a few waves of enemies. Ratchet and Kit arrive on Cordelian to create a Dimensionator using their blueprints. While trying to figure out the Rubion Forge, they accidentally blow it up, but ultimately find out there's another one in another dimension. After using a giant monster to power the forge, they create a Dimensionator and are on their way to Xerkes to wait for Rivet. Rivet, still searching for a way to fix the phase cord, arrives on Toron 4. This planet houses a giant robot named the Fixer, but he's upset that he can't fix things. After a cinematic grind battle, Clank is able to convince the Fixer that he has fixed him emotionally, which makes the Fixer happy and he agrees to help them fix the phase quartz. This allows the duo to be back on their way to Xerkes to meet up with Ratchet. Once again, back on Xerkes, Ratchet and Rivet meet up. The four are immediately arrested by nefarious troops and thrown into the arena. A dimension jumping fight against Nefarious ensues, and the real Emperor arrives and steals the Dimensionator. He teams up with Dr. Nefarious to attack Sargasso. While Rivet heads to Sargasso, Ratchet chases after this dimension's Captain Quark, Captain Quantum. Rivet arrives once again on Sargasso to defend the Morts against an all-out war. Emperor Nefarious eventually arrives on the planet and sends Rivet and Kit into a pocket dimension. The two make it out and head back to Xerxes to meet up with Ratchet. Ratchet and Clank arrive on Ardolis to save Captain Quantum. After a few trials, they finally meet up with Captain Quantum, who is pretending to be a robot pirate. His disguise is lost and his pirates turn on him. Emperor Nefarious attacks and Captain Quantum falls into a dimensional rift. Ratchet and Clank decides to go back to Xerxes to tell Rivet what happened. A side activity can be completed here to find a pirate's treasure, and that's the last side activity of the entire game. Ratchet and Clank are interrupted mid-flight by Emperor Nefarious. He's planning to go to Savali to steal the dimensional map. Rivet and Kit were listening in as well and are on their way to help out. Ratchet arrives back on a war-torn Savali. He reaches the building and the dimensional map is gone. We switch over to Rivet and she works her way through Nefarious' flagship until she meets with Gary, who had been captured. The dimensional map is confirmed to have been hidden, so now we switch back to Ratchet and make it through some catacombs, and then they are captured by Emperor Nefarious. Rivet arrives and is protected by Kit, who is sent to another planet by Dr. Nefarious. Rivet, now alone, travels to Visceron to go and save Ratchet and Clank. Arriving on Visceron, Rivet travels to the planet defeating guards and freeing prisoners, before finally saving Ratchet and Clank. Kit decides that she can't save the world because she's too dangerous as a warbot and abandons the team. The rest of them all meet up at Xerxes. And well, now we've made it. This is the final mission of the game. That's right. We're already here. The heroes all head to Megalopolis for the final showdown against Emperor Nefarious. Kit arrives to help after all, and the heroes defeat the Emperor and Dr. Nefarious. The final battle only takes 20 to 25 minutes to complete, which brings us to a total of 10 to 15 minutes without cutscenes before the game is actually over. The length of these worlds is rarely longer than an episode of an anime. Savali is the only actually good level in terms of how it's utilized. It's a huge open space with tons of secrets to find and things to do. The level is so large that Ratchet, Clank, and Kit will have random spouts of dialogue to help the flow of exploration as you dart across the open land. I find Savali as the only level worthwhile to play through. It captures nearly everything the game has to offer as though it's one giant playground used to mess with the systems introduced in Rift Apart. And because of this, no other planet can compete with Savali. It's not chock full of genius level design, but the scenery is so varied that it gives loads of things to do. Sadly, there's only one side quest for the planet, and it's one that actually links directly into the story. And there's a reason that no level can match the openness of Savali. It just happens to be placed in the right point of the story where much more than one thing can happen. Games have a couple systems that they can be broken into. An example that's in nearly every mission-based game ever, you've arrived at a stage for a very specific reason. You only need to do that one thing and then get out. But now, you've suddenly found yourself in the middle of a war. The thing that you need is in the hands of the enemy. You meet several different characters and do a variety of things to prepare to storm the enemy's base. Then, you finally retrieve the item that you've been set to get and you're able to get off the planet. A section like that can take 2 to 3 hours or more depending on how many missions are placed about, the size of the worlds, and the difficulty of the combat. In a linear game, you have a start point and an end point. Whatever happens during that level is just what happens in that 1 to 3 minute level. You won't ever have an instance where you're running through a level as Sonic and then some random character shouts for you mid-run, making you stop and take a detour over in his direction because he's got something going on and he needs Sonic's help. Now, there's nothing wrong with linear games at all. Linear games make it much easier to have focused action rather than leaving it all up to the player to create their own action. What I am saying is that when you focus so heavily on the story, you can only go from plot point to plot point, otherwise you risk deviating from the set path and adding in too many characters that have no purpose. Just as well, they'd have a hard time fitting more than one story into the worlds where walking 2 feet would get you to the end of the map. These worlds are far too short. The plot lines for each are way too straightforward. There's no room for anything on the side, and you will collect everything on your first run through the planet. Also, once you leave, you're not going to be returning to any of these planets for more story except for 3 out of the 10. I can almost promise you, as long as you just move the camera ever so slightly away from the linear path, you won't be coming back to these planets for things you missed. That's enough about how story directly affects the progress of a game. Your gameplay also plays a deciding factor in that. When it comes to gunplay in Ratchet and Clank, it's been simplified to the point of just holding down the trigger and letting the bullets fly at any enemy within a 50-foot radius. The guns have always been flashy and over the top. The real part you play in Ratchet and Clank is the acrobatics that Ratchet does while firing, flipping and jumping all around trying to avoid the barrage of enemy bullets and kamikazes constantly flying at you. Ratchet and Clank is like the response to a bullet hell. Instead of you dodging the patterns of flying objects, you're the creator of every sporadic shot. It's very hard to knock Ratchet and Clank when it comes to their over-the-top gunplay, but you can judge based on the use of their gadgets. Something I noticed about playing Rift Apart is gimmick use being restricted to worlds. They're used heavily when you first get them, and then they're later reduced to a way to get to the next platform that's just out of reach, or they're just outright not used anymore at all. Sure, you can use the hover boots at any time, but there's no challenges or feats you need to do during any other level except for the one that you first get them in. The thing that's always bothered me about hectic linear plot lines is that they never seem to have room to add in fun side objectives past tournaments. This experience of the game would really be enhanced by adding something like hover boot races or challenges to get to the top of a really tall area. Like I said earlier, Savali is the only place that truly displays nearly every feature in the game. It's a large open space with secrets hidden all about, with varied locations that make it feel like an actual planet, rather than a level with the planet as a backdrop. Savali even has an entire armor set that can be unlocked, which it happens to be the same armor that you pre-ordered, but just with a different name. It's still awesome. The worlds are way too small, way too enclosed, and way too linear. You can't really do anything in them besides the main story, because anything outside of that wouldn't be more than a one-room area with a quick 5-minute objective. Every secret in the game is presented in plain sight. So much to the point that you will often accidentally find something that you're apparently not supposed to know about. Well, I suppose it does have side areas that take you to another dimension, right? The portals that you enter. They all look exactly the same, let's be real. These small pocket dimensions take literally 20 to 30 seconds to complete. They're so small that they're no different than just another area on the map. There is no seamless transition here. The seamlessness of the game is rarely in the control of the player, if ever. Sorry, but when I heard about seamless loading in the various trailers presented for Rift Apart, I was under the impression that you'd be hopping to each planet through portals, which wasn't the case, which would actually be impressive. The only real examples of seamless transition controlled by the player happens on Cordelion and Blizzard Prime. The speed at which the world changes is impressive, I won't deny that. However, is that really the only thing you could come up with? An alive and dead version of 2 planets. You have seamless transitions, and that's the best you can do. The game itself is way too easy. The challenges are way too short. The secrets aren't secret. There's not enough extras, and one of the extras they do have literally doesn't give you an in-game reward, you just get a trophy. True, not every game needs to be loaded with stuff to do on the side, but when somebody can accidentally 100% your game, maybe, just maybe, you're not doing enough for your game. Of course, there's challenge mode, which you unlock after beating the game, which lets you replay the entire game again and nets you 2 new weapons, and you can max out your guns even further. But why would you want to do any of that? It sure makes the game feel longer, huh? Circuits is where you'll get the most joy out of any side objective. However, there's only 3 ranks and 5 missions in each. So even when it comes to the optional recurring tournament of the game, it fails to bring anything exciting enough to the table. You know how games add content in just for the sake of handing the player things to do, no matter how minuscule? Well, it's like Rift Apart wanted to give players things to do, but they basically were given a rough draft of things that could be included, and they added a bunch of test versions from that draft, then completely forgot to flesh any of them out and add more to the game. Everything you can do on the side, every collectible, and every challenge feels thrown in as a complete afterthought. There's nothing AAA about a game that can be beaten in less time it takes for a school day to be over, and even less so, one that can also be platinum before the sun sets. Now hey, Rift Apart isn't a bad game by any means. Were this a $20 to $30 game, this would be an absolutely incredible experience front to back. It shows the beginning of what the PS5 is capable of creating graphically. As a $70 game, this is quite possibly one of the worst games to use when trying to show that a game being priced so high is worth it. When indie developers can make 20+ hour games and then charge only $15 for a 10 out of 10 experience, it becomes clear that the hype with exclusives can often be overblown. Sure, there are some absolutely incredible exclusives that raise the bar and introduce mechanics that will be copied into games over, but not every game is deserving of this $70 price tag. If you budgeted so poorly that a 6-hour experience needs to charge $70 to repay how much you put in, you're definitely misusing your resources. The ratings on this game need to be dropped drastically. $70 is an insane price for such a small amount of content given to you. Rift Apart explores a variety of systems that the PS5 has to offer, sure. But see, it's also too afraid to be anything more than what it has been for the past decade. A very short, action-packed adventure that never strays too far away from home and is afraid of taking chances. Insomniac really needs an overhaul of this series if they plan to actually impress anybody that isn't a games journalist. Newcomers to the system may be impressed by the flashy content and graphical fidelity that Rift Apart delivers, but I don't think that graphics and rehashed decade-old gameplay is enough to ask for $70. But if it's an exclusive, no matter the quality of the game or length of the product, you can bet they'll be demanding that $70 so they can walk away with even more money than they actually deserve. As far as I'm concerned, Ratchet and Clank is not a complete $70 experience. I don't believe it brings enough to the AAA category, and you're not doing yourself any favors by touting this as your favorite game for 2021. I have a better category for this 6-hour adventure. Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart isn't a game, rather, it's a playable showcase. It is a glorified, over-marketed, overpriced, and overhyped tech demo attempting to wow the player with just how capable the PS5 is. It uses various tricks and gimmicks to convince you that everything is seamless and immediate. To a point, sure, it is, when the story calls for it. But in reality, everything is highly scripted. It's so easy it's near impossible to lose. Everything can be collected and completed your first run through to the point of platinuming the game. Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart is more like a movie being successfully converted to a game, which seems very on brand for Insomniac, considering that they did exactly this back in 2016 with their remake of the first Ratchet and Clank. With all of these things stacked against it, I think it's clear that Rift Apart doesn't do nearly enough to deserve the $70 price tag. It's a great game as a concept that needed much longer to be fleshed out. It seems the developers need to be reminded that this is still a game that people will be required to pay top dollar for. I get it. The budget is there. The graphics are there. The exciting gameplay, great acting, animation is all there. But it doesn't feel like a AAA experience when I only get 6 hours of gameplay. The delivery of its systems, depressing lack of side content, brain-dead cinematic action sequences, and overly forgiving gameplay, mixed with a feature-length story that makes it hard to defend the pricing that it's asking for. The developers should be ashamed for touting the AAA branding when the development team would actually be pulling themselves thin from adding more than a maximum of 13 hours of content. That's all the time I've got for this video. If you guys liked it, be sure to beat the hell out of that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content. Go ahead and follow me on Twitter at KotyTang to harass me, and I'll see you guys in the next one.